Today, I want to go over how to analyze target audience and writer's purpose. I have a little guest with me today. This is Miyagi. He was born in our barn this summer. So he's going to be joining me today for your lecture. So, anyway, today we're going to talk about analyzing audience and writer's purpose. And first of all, I want to talk about why that's important. A lot of times, my freshman writers have problems with picturing an audience other than their peers or me, their professor. But if you are writing to your professor as your audience, then you're not really getting your point across in the way that you probably desire. So, I want to talk about why audience is important for your purpose, and then we're going to take some notes. Okay. So, in order to write concisely, you have to understand the needs and values, the opinions, the demographic of your audience members in order to understand how to convey your message. For example, we've talked about that the Pope Francis speech, which you're hopefully working on or you've already turned in, and the fact that he was talking to an audience of children. We also know that they were immigrants. We also know that they were in an impoverished neighborhood. We also know that parents and teachers were present, and we also know that language barrier might have been a constraint. So, all of those things are important because if the Pope had come and given the speech in an intellectual fashion, none of the children would have understood it. Or if he had given an hour-long speech, the children would have lost their attention span. So when you are writing, you want to think about if I did have an audience, and I know that's tough, but if I did have an audience, who would it be and why? And then that's going to help you decide your purpose for writing. Okay. So let's see here. Take some notes on target audience. And I mentioned the needs and values of your audience. For example, if you are speaking at a political rally and you've been invited to a conservative rally, but you are a liberal, you're going to have to temper your speech to reach those conservatives. Otherwise, you're going to turn them off. What you're saying is not applicable to them. So, your speech is going to look a lot different if you have an audience whose needs and values are different than your own. If your audience's needs and values are similar to your own, um, that changes the language you use. It might change the examples you use. It might change the research you use. Okay. Another important thing about audience is age, economic background, gender is probably important, ethnicity and race, political viewpoints. Sometimes sexuality is important, understanding your audience's, lifestyle preferences, sexuality preferences, um, their needs and values might also be tied to these things. Another important aspect of audience is understanding. Oh my gosh, I just lost what I was gonna say. Um, oh, understanding if they have prior knowledge to your topic. Because if your audience doesn't have any prior knowledge, then the way you present your information is going to be a lot more detailed, maybe a lot more elementary in word choice. Okay. Whereas if you're speaking to an audience that's informed about your specific subject, then you might be able to speak at a higher diction level, a higher word choice level. You might be able to use allusions to things that might not be common knowledge to everyone, but in your particular case where your audience knows your background, you might be able to use terms that the audience would understand, right? Think about like if a dentist was giving a professional development to dental hygienists versus a dentist giving information to the general public about what dental hygienists do. The vocabulary is going to be completely different. The subject is the same, right? Dental hygienists work. But the way that information is presented is definitely different. Okay. So those are things we want to think about with target audience. And let's see here. All right. Knowing your target, let me turn my phone off. That's distracting me. All right. So, author's purpose. In order to have a specific purpose that works, you need to know your audience. All right. So, in order to establish a good purpose, you have to know your audience. Um, and knowing your audience is going to affect the language that you will use and the types of examples and support that you're going to use. All right. So, those things are going to contribute to what's the purpose of your argument. Okay. So when you're thinking about purpose, you want to think about like what's the big deal? Who cares about what you're saying? Okay. Um, and if you can answer that question, sorry, I need to get more comfortable. Okay. If you can answer that question, then you have an outcome for your essay, right? Or for your work or your speech. What and then this says, I know this is kind of hard to read. What do you want out of your presentation of information? So, do you want people to take action? Like maybe your essay is trying to persuade people to vote, right? Like that's a pretty valid topic these days. First of all, you would want to think about who are you persuading to vote? Is it people your own age? Is it your parents' generation? Is it people your own race? Is it people your own political affiliation? Because answering those questions for yourself is, like I said, going to change the way you present the information. And then also, when we're thinking about purpose, what's the outcome? Well, the outcome is you want people to vote, right? So your purpose is convincing people to vote. and the outcome that you would like to see is that people actually go and vote. You also want to think about alternatives for outcomes. So if people don't vote, what else could be an option based on your presentation of information? So if you're trying to get people to vote, you obviously care about your community and politics. So maybe if people aren't convinced to vote, they will start caring more about their community, or they will at least start educating themselves more about local politics, right? So you want to be able to think about a couple of different options for the outcome. Like, what do you want from the presentation of information? Okay. So let's go back to the Pope Francis speech. Um, we talked about how he had to know his audience in order to build the speech and present it. But what's the big deal? Who cares? Well, it's not just the kids that care. I mean, this was the first visit on his first people American visit. He didn't visit the White House. He didn't visit a governor. He didn't visit any rich people. He went to one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the US to talk to immigrants. A lot of those students were not American citizens, about how America can present the ability to dream, right? Like that was part of the purpose of this speech. So, in order to present those kind of large life ideas to these kids, Pope Francis had to know a lot about them, right? This particular speech would look a lot different if it were given to a White House audience, or if it were given to a private, expensive boarding school audience. Okay, you can definitely present the same ideas to those audiences, but the way those ideas are conveyed are going to be completely different. Okay, now let's think about, what do you think the Pope's big idea was? Like, who cares about that speech? Well, the answer is not simply those students or that school. The answer is that was a huge PR move by the Vatican, right? To show the Pope's priorities, right? His priorities are religiously affiliated, of course. He went to a Catholic school, but he is in an impoverished neighborhood. So we know that his priorities are caring about those who are living in poverty. We know that he cares about those who are living on the margins of society. That's why he specifically talks about how immigrants have often struggled to learn the language, make friends. Remember, he talks about that. So he's really trying to pull those kids in from the margins of society where they might feel like foreigners or strangers. So part of the purpose is raising awareness, especially within the American context, that, America is filled with people who aren't Americans. America is filled with people who maybe are Americans but feel like strangers, and those people exist and should be cared about and supported in their pursuit of the American dream, right? Um, so, the big who cares for the Pope was publicity, right? And when you look at the speech, you might not think, oh, he just, was doing this for publicity. But when you look at the context, first stop on the American visit, right? First American visit in general, um, those things kind of point to the purpose of showing the Pope's priorities. So that's a little bit more detailed information about why it's important to know your audience so that you can develop a purpose for your writing and think about your writing and the presentation of information as a whole. Sometimes students will start writing their introduction without having outlined the whole paper, so they go like step by step in order of what the paper is going to be like. But really, if you remember, we talked about the introduction should be a preview of the entire paper. So if you don't have an idea of what the outcome of your paper needs to be, or how your paper is going to end, or what type of support you're going to have, or what audience you're targeting, then you're not going to be able to write an effective introduction. So, this lecture, I also want to encourage you to never start writing a paper without an outline and without knowing what your audience and purpose is. So actually, let's write that down in your notebook. Okay. So we never want to write without knowing audience, identifying purpose, and it's important to also identify, um, other viewpoints or opposing perspectives. All right, so never write without knowing your audience, identifying your purpose for your writing, and identifying opposing perspectives. And we're going to talk more about opposing perspectives and why that's important in a different lecture. So take these notes down, and I think we're going to be finished with that for today. And I'll see you next time.